Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint whatever this is. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, and let's get started. So the canvas I'm using has been painted over before. I just put a couple coats of white paint on it over top of an old painting. If you're using a brand new canvas, you can do that, or you can use gesso, or you can just go right to it without doing anything. I'm going to use this piece of gray chalk to sketch out the skull that I'm going to do. Now, kind of plan out how big you want it to be. I want this to be a fairly large skull, so about 2 inches or so from the top and the bottom. I'm going to start by just drawing a large circle, which is going to be the top portion of the head. And because this is chalk and it will clean off, you can kind of sketch around until you get the shape that you like. Then I'm going to do an oval that is going to be the cheekbones. I'm going to come up into this circle about 1.5 inches or so and draw an oval out. This oval is not going to extend past the edges of the circle. If it does, just wipe it off and bring it in a little bit. And once you start filling the shape in, you can adjust any of these lines. Now I'm going to do another circle that starts right at the base of this one and comes out and around. It's definitely smaller than this top circle, and it doesn't extend out as far as the cheekbones. Bring it down just a little bit more. So that's our basic skull shape. Let's come now from the cheekbones here in toward this circle and then bring it straight down, and on this side as well. And we can kind of round it off a little bit. So it's got kind of a rectangular jaw, but not a square. Let's clean up some of these lines in here that we don't need anymore so that we can focus on the features and not have to contend with this. So I'm just going to take a soft brush. This is a filbert, but it doesn't matter. Just wet it in the jar and you can kind of scrub them away. You don't need to worry about it being too tidy. Just clean up the lines that you don't want anymore so that you don't get confused in a minute. When we fill it in with paint, it will cover this chalk, so I'm not worried about getting it completely cleaned up. All right, so we're gonna add the eyes, and you can do the eyes however you like. The eyes will extend down about to the cheekbones, so don't put them clear up here unless you want a really cartoony looking skull. So I'm just gonna start sketching an eye right about like that. I like kind of an egg shape, but whatever you prefer. I've even seen sugar skulls done with heart-shaped eyes. I am going to do kind of a heart-shaped nose, and the very top point of that is going to come up here just between the eyes a little bit, and it's going to extend down here into the cheekbones. So we'll just take a little bit of a heart shape like that, and another one over here. For the teeth, I'm just going to draw a line from one side to the other, right about in the center of the chin and the bottom of the nose. Let's give the head a little bit more definition with some temple bones. So I'm going to bring a line here by the eyes. So around the eye, it's going to swoop back into the cheekbone. Now I'm going to start drawing some pill shapes. That's kind of how I like to describe them, like a pill. So it's kind of round on the top, wide, and round on the bottom. Start in the middle and do the tooth on either side of the center. That will help you plan out where the rest of them are going to go a little bit better. If you start at the center and move all the way out and then come back, you might end up with more teeth on one side than on the other side. So that's why I'm going right, left, right, left. Make sure that you keep the horizontal line that we already drew right about in the center of these teeth. And I think I'm just going to add 6 teeth. I like the way that that looks. I'm going to take my 5/8 inch angle brush. I wet it in the jar. This is just the brush that I'm the most comfortable with filling this in, but whatever is the most comfortable for you to use. I'm going to make up kind of a warm off-white. So I'm going to load up with some white, grab a little bit of burnt umber. I'm going to keep it pretty white still, but just with a little bit of burnt umber in there to tone it down a bit. This is where you can start adjusting your line. Use the edge of your brush to draw out the line that you actually want. And actually that gray chalk is coloring my paint just a little bit, but I kind of like the way it looks. It's adding just another little layer of shadow in there. And if you happen to go outside of your line a little bit while you're doing this, don't sweat it because we haven't painted the background yet. And when we paint the background, you can cover up anything that you ended up not liking about the shape and size of the skull. Notice my color is a little bit different every time I go back and mix it up. And I know some of you don't like that. You express frustration when you can't mix up the exact same color. But I don't mind that. That's actually why I mix my color as I go, because I like the painterly effect that you can get from having slightly different tones. So don't stress that. Just go with it and let what happen, happen. I'm going to get in pretty close to that line there. I'll end up putting a line on it to keep that separation, but I don't want to lose it right now. Stand back every once in a while and make sure that you're not losing your proportions as you're painting around these sketched out areas. Like I did. Up and around the teeth. If you need to use a different brush, if you're not comfortable doing this with the angle brush going around these little areas, that's perfectly okay. Grab whatever brush you're comfortable with. I happen to be the most comfortable with my angle brush, but not everybody is. All right, now that we've got it all blocked in, we can start deciding where the highlights and shadows might be. So when you think about a skull, it's not flat. It's very curved. Some parts are recessed, some parts poke out farther. So around the eyes might have a little more shadow, definitely back here in the temple, underneath the cheekbones. Just think about where those highlights and shadows might be. It would definitely be brighter up here in this area. So I'm just gonna get some more white. Make sure that it's quite a bit lighter of a color. And I'm just gonna lightly streak it in. I'm not repainting the whole thing. This is almost impressionistic. We're just giving the feeling of some highlights on here. Just straight white there. I wanna really brighten it up. And once we do our elements, a lot of this may be covered up, but you don't really know unless you've planned it out really, really well beforehand So just act like you're not going to do any elements on there. And let's take that just a little bit darker. One way to make highlights seem really bright is to place darker color next to them. I'm just going to lightly kind of streak it into there. My brush is almost dry. I can feel quite a bit of drag, and I like that because it's helping me just place the paint without over blending it. If my brush were quite a bit wetter, then this paint would blend more. But see how it's streaky and you can see the ends of my brush stroke more? That's because my brush is drying out a bit. And that's actually what I want. Notice I'm kind of going in all different directions. I'm just being really free and loose with this. A little lighter right here because I feel like that's where the bridge of the nose will start. Maybe the brows poke out a little farther right there. Definitely brighter right here. And a little darker right in here underneath. Get some lighter color right here. I've kind of decided that my light source is up here shining this way. So that's why I have some shadow over here and the lighter over here. So I feel like it would be a little bit brighter on this side of the nose and the cheekbone area. Definitely brighter right in here. And up along the temple here. See how just adding that little tiny bit of shadow right there next to the lighter area pushed the eye socket back into the head a little bit more and makes the temple bone and the cheekbone seem to stand out farther, just from slightly darkening the exact same color. I'm still not wetting my brush. It's still quite dry and I'm getting a lot of drag. I'm going to add some shadow on this side. And just kind of, I'm not picking up a ton of paint. That's why I'm not really laying any down right here. It's just kind of fuzzing itself out. A little on this side of the nose, because it does poke out just a little bit on the edge here. Can you tell how much paint I have on here? Like there's some down here toward the ferrule, but up here, there's really not a ton. If you put too much paint on your brush, you're gonna have a hard time getting it to kind of streak together like that. I'm gonna bring this shadow up just a little bit higher. And I'm gonna make it a little bit lighter right here on this side of the socket. Remember when I said to think about your light source as a light bulb in your room. So if I have a light bulb up in this corner shining down, think about where it might be hitting. So it wouldn't be hitting in here because that's recessed. It would pass right over it. This is kind of facing the light source, so it would have a little bit more of a reflection on it than this area. And my temple would still have a bit of brightness on it. Super light pressure there just to dust it. And I'm going to put more white right there. So I've actually been planning on painting a sugar skull for you all week long. And that's what I've been working on all week. And while I was making progress with the style I was going for, I wasn't feeling it really. It just didn't feel right. But I figured, well, I practiced it all week. I'm just gonna go with it and get it out there. And I had some frustration with it today, mostly just because I wasn't happy with it, not because it wasn't turning out, just because I wasn't feeling it. So I had my little frustration moment, and remember I said that frustration is okay as long as you use it appropriately. I'm just adding more highlight on this side. So I let myself kind of get frustrated and irritated for a few minutes. And then I regrouped and decided, you know, I think the reason I wasn't feeling that other painting was it wasn't in my style. And it's really hard to paint something that you don't feel. You know, a lot of artists can paint anything and be happy with it. And a lot of artists have to feel whatever it is that they're painting before they can do it. So I put some shadow here because his cheekbone extends and then this dips back in a little bit. So once I realized that that's why I wasn't liking it, I decided, all right, well, how is it that I paint? And you know, I don't like real precise things. And if you look at a lot of sugar skulls, you know, sugar skull art, it's very precise. You know, there's very crisp lines, black outlines, and that's not really how I do things. I mean, once in a while I will, but as a rule, that's not how I paint. And that's how I was trying to make myself paint. And I decided, all right, well, I'm just gonna do it how I feel it and see what happens. So this that you're watching right now is actually my first attempt at giving myself permission with this painting to just do whatever feels right. So I hope I can actually teach you something with it. Just putting a little bit extra highlight right at the top of these teeth, since where the teeth grow out, it does protrude just a little bit. Actually, I'm going to take that shadow in there a bit. Just right here around the edge. Let me actually show you real quick what my brush stroke is. So when I'm adding these shadows and highlights, I'm not doing this. What I'm doing is just kind of dashing. So my camera died while I was in the middle of showing you this. I was so in the zone while I was painting this. This painting is being so therapeutic for me. I really needed it. And so you missed all of this area. But what I was showing you here was the brush stroke that I'm doing. I'm really just kind of using the end of the brush, and I'm not pressing it flat. I'm kind of dashing like this. So you can see how that paint is really fuzzy. I'm not laying down a ton. I'm going in all different directions. And because the layer that I'm painting this on top of is very similar, it's blending in with it, even if I'm painting on top of dry paint. It's not smearing the paints together. It's just kind of, it's almost like glazing because this is so transparent. So that's what I'm doing. Don't try and paint it like this, and don't overwork it so that you get a muddy mess. Another thing I was telling you was, you know, people ask me about light source a lot. That light source is really confusing for them, and I understand that. So if you're trying to paint something like this and you're really confused about where the light would be hitting and where the shadows would be, get something, if you have a skull at home for some reason, or even just a doll, like a plastic face doll, get that and set it up about in the way that you want to paint your skull, and take a light and shine it on it from different directions. Notice where the shadows fall. Notice where the light reflects. Make a mental note of that and bring those things to your canvas. So if you have to set it up off to the side of your canvas with a light shining on it, put the shadows in the same type of place. Another thing I was telling you, like right here under the teeth, I put a darker tone just under these teeth, and then a brighter tone right here because the chin would poke forward a little bit more there. I was telling you that notice I went from dark to light. I didn't have the mid-tone in between them. Sometimes if you have a straight gradation of color from dark, middle, light tones, it's gonna look flat, or it's gonna look like a flat surface that's kind of angled. I wanted this to seem like a sharp curve at the chin, so that's why I have dark right into light. That gives the impression that it's got a pretty steep curve to it. So don't be afraid to take your light tones and put them right next to your dark tones. Notice how when I do that here, how I've got the lighter tone here next to this dark tone here, that makes your eye see this as a curved surface. Stand back from it every few minutes so that you can kind of take in the whole picture. Decide if your highlights and your shadows are right. And do this really slowly, you know, build them up layer by layer. Don't expect that you're gonna go at it and get your highlights and your shadows right the first time. You could absolutely work on something like this for days and days on end and really focus on getting those shadows and highlights exactly the way you want them. I feel like I need just a little more shadow right in here. And again, because I haven't painted the background yet, it doesn't matter if I go outside of this a little bit. I think my brush is getting just a little bit too dry. So if that happens, take your brush and just barely touch the tip of the brush to the top of the water. Don't dunk it in there, just barely touch the water. And take a paper towel and just kind of blot it off a little bit. Now that color should blend a little bit better. Yep, there we go. Almost too much. I might almost have too much water in here still. I went up into my highlight a little more than I wanted there, but I'm not worried about that because I can add it back. You can scrub a little if you need to. And we'll just add that highlight back in there, especially on this side where my light source is. All right, let's get some shadow going on in these temples. I'm having a really rough day today, guys. Really, really rough. And it's mostly in my recording that it's rough. So I've mixed up a darker color and I'm going to start slashing it into the temple area here. I had to paint over this part because my head is like in 50,000 different places, I swear. So of course I forgot to hit record, and I painted in this whole side and it looked rad, and then I had to paint over it so I could show you how to do it. So this part that I'm painting in the temple is the farthest from the light source. So it's going to be quite dark. I'm going to take the dark color all the way to that line. Remember where I was painting it in the base color and I didn't go all the way to my chalk line? I'm going to go ahead and do that now since I can have definite definition between the two areas. I'm going to take a little bit of this darkness up here just above the eyebrow ridge. Scrub a little bit, but if you're using a brush you really like, I probably wouldn't recommend scrubbing. This brush is already getting old, and in the next couple months, hopefully I will have my brushes out. So I don't really care if I ruin this brush. For those of you who don't know, I think everybody knows by now, but in case you don't know, I am releasing my very own custom line of paintbrushes very, very soon. These are not rebranded brushes like, you know, just some generic brush that I have my name stamped on. These are brushes being built to my specifications. You will not find them anywhere else. So I'm super, super excited for that. I'm going to make sure I leave that eyebrow ridge with some brightness on it. Now right here, see how I've got the super bright and the super dark, and there's a hard line between them. That hard line is going to make this piece of bone look flat, like it's just jutting out and stops. But I want it to still have that curved look to it. So to do that, right along this bright edge, I'm going to bring just a little bit of a darker color in. Not quite as dark as this color. And just right there along that edge, and dust it in here. That's going to help it seem like a curved surface again, where we talked about that on the chin. And I know you might have missed that part when my stupid camera died. Get some brighter. And make sure this center part stays nice and bright. Now I'm laying down even just a little bit more paint, a little bit heavier of pure white, to really start amping up some of these highlight areas. Super, super light pressure. I'm barely touching the canvas, and that's how I'm breaking that line. So this paint here is dry, but I'm putting this white paint over top of it, and I'm not getting hard lines, and that's all because of the super light pressure. Let's put just a little bit of a shadow in this temple right here. I don't want it to be too dark, but there would be a little bit of a shadow in here. Because my light source is up high, this part of the head is curved out, this part is curved in, so the light wouldn't be hitting in here directly. And I think that might be a little dark, but that's okay. So I think what I want you guys to get out of this painting is not necessarily how to paint a skull. If you get how to paint a weird half sugar skull, half impressionistic, sort of almost realistic skull, then that's cool. But what I really want you to get out of it is to start thinking about light source. Start trying to pay attention to the way light hits things, where it casts shadows. I am becoming very, very happy with this so far. Let's see, we have to do something in here. This part looks weird to me. So I think in a skull, I think this part pokes out a bit. So we're gonna kind of brighten that up. I think it pokes out a little bit right around here too. I could be wrong. I'm not using any kind of reference. I'm just going off of what I think a skull looks like. And that's okay. And if it's not exactly what a skull looks like, that's okay too. A little bit of a highlight right here underneath. So that would say to me that if it pokes out a little more here, and I know this part pokes out a little more, there would be a little bit of shadow in here. Maybe not quite that much. Give him some kind of weird mustache. The other thing I want you to get out of painting this is how to loosen up. Just giving some of those little crevices that are between teeth. And if I decide I don't like those, I'll just paint them out. But so far, I think I actually like them. Just a little bit like that. And dust it out on either side. So whether you paint a skull like this, or whether you paint an apple, or, you know, whatever you decide to paint, trying out the light source techniques and painting a little bit looser, I just want you to go into it with the expectation that you're going to have fun and you're going to experiment, not that you're going to come out with this rad skull painting at the end. And I very well may not come out with a rad skull painting at the end. I'm amping up that highlight that's over the center of the tooth, because again, that's going to indicate a rounded surface. These are going to be pushed back and this is going to be pulled forward. Let me show you the kind of pressure I'm using. So I have quite a bit of white paint on here and I'm just barely touching. Can you even see the paint that's coming off on there? Not very much. And my pressure is so light. See that? My hand is resting firmly on my canvas. So I'm just moving my fingers just the tiniest bit just to dust that out. So even though I have quite a bit of paint on here still, I'm not really applying paint so much as just daubing it and then pushing it or patting it around. So there's a white highlight, and then I'm just going to very lightly kind of smear it out. The bulk of the paint I'm working on right here is dry. Dust out that line that got in my shadow of the highlight with a little bit of darker paint. And add my shadow on that tooth. See how I'm kind of pulling it up, almost toward the center of this tooth. And in doing so, I already create that highlight by not covering that part, if that makes any sense. So see if I dust it up toward the center there. And then I can get just a little bit of white and tap in my highlight, kick back any of that shadow that got too intense there or has too hard of a line. Pressure is what's going to do all of this for you. Too much pressure and this is going to be really, really hard. I think my shadows between these teeth would be a little bit lighter over on this side since it's closer to my light source. So I made the line not quite as tall, and I'm probably going to kick it back quite a bit more with white than I did on the other teeth. On the bottom teeth here, I'm going to add just a little bit of highlight right into the middle. I don't need to worry about adding the low light because it's already there. Just barely going to do any over on this side. And it'll slowly get more intense as I move toward this side. And even pick up some of your shadow color if it gets too intense. Can you see how just a couple bristles are touching? Just barely. A little more white. I'm going to amp that one up pretty good right there. So I think I've decided that I'm not going to add all the little designer elements that are normally on a sugar skull. I'm liking the way this is going. I ended up doing something that I hadn't planned on doing. Well, I hadn't really planned on doing much of anything, just kind of working out some frustration. But I'm liking the way this is going. So we're still going to call it a sugar skull. We're just going to say that it's now a sugar skull because it is made out of sugar. It's a skull made out of sugar. And I know that traditionally sugar skulls for the Mexican Day of the Dead are made out of sugar, but this is a fancy one that's not designed. Let's brighten up that highlight there. Now I'm really going to start playing with the highlights, really amping them up. Let's do a little bit of that on the chin here too. So I laid down a bit and then I'm just going to lightly spread some of it just a little bit. And this is probably a little bit more of an advanced painting than some of my other paintings. But if you're still brand new to painting and you really want to try this, there is nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trying to paint above the level that you perceive yourself to be at. Because even if you end up not liking what you do, you don't understand the concepts, you feel like you can't pull it off, there's nothing wrong with trying. You know the saying, trial by fire, right? Well, that's a saying for a reason. And I think that sometimes when we push ourselves to do something that we're not ready to do, I think that that can be a little bit more of a growing opportunity than always trying to stay with what we're comfortable with. So if you try this and you're not ready for it and you feel like you fail at it, I guarantee that you still learned something that you can take to your next painting, even if your next painting is a complete beginner painting. I'm just going to play with these highlights a little bit more, and then we'll move on and do the teeth, the nose, and the eyes, and then we'll start thinking about the background. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do on the background just yet. I have some ideas, but we'll see. I'm just going to really pop some of these highlights. I'm using much thicker paint, but the same brush stroke with the same pressure. Just laying down more paint. See, quite a bit of paint there. And if I were painting this for myself and not trying to save you guys from watching a 19-hour video, I would probably go through and do this same thing with the low lights and really kick some of these low lights back really hard with some heavy dark paint, just like I'm doing with these highlights. And maybe we'll do that later on another video. Maybe I'll even save this one and we'll come back and do the low lights at another time. Why don't you leave me a comment below and let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in seeing. A separate video where we do this exact same painting, not start to finish. We'll just use this canvas and we'll kick some of these low lights back and really amp this whole thing up a little bit more than what we're doing on it right now. Now, on this temple right here, remember on the other side where I said that I was breaking up that line, taking some of the darker down my front temple bone so that it seemed rounded and not flat? Well, over here, notice I put my highlight right up against that line. And that's because if this is a curved surface, so it's deeper here, higher here, deeper here, you know, like that, this whole side of that bone would be in direct light, so it would be very bright right there. So you don't have to take your shadow line down that edge. In fact, if you did, it would throw your light source off. So I cleaned off my brush and I have the tiniest drop of Mars Black. And I'm gonna get just a little bit of it, not a ton, and I'm gonna mix it over here with my burnt umber. And I'm gonna take just a little bit of white, just to keep my color scheme fairly consistent. But that little bit of black is gonna make it noticeably darker than the rest of the burnt umber that I used. And I want that because these eyes are much deeper set and much more out of the light source than the temple over here. So I'm going to start filling in this eye. And notice I am still using my paint pretty thin and pretty dry. I want a consistent look. If I filled in these eyes too solidly, then they would really stand out from the rest of the painting. I'm going to fill in the nose with the same color. I'm actually going to go to my little round brush because it's easier to maneuver in these little round areas. Now with these eye sockets, think about in an actual skull, the eye socket doesn't just go back into this whole area. So we would have light and shadow playing back here. It wouldn't just be a dark abyss back there. So your light source rules are gonna apply here too. So along this edge, it's gonna be quite dark. Along this edge here, it's gonna be a little bit lighter and it's gonna kind of fade back a bit. This one, the darkness is going to be here and the light will be over here. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more of my dark brown. And I'm not really going to add any white to it. And I'm just going to start streaking that dark into here and pulling it out a bit. It's going to be quite dark up in this area because my light source is not hitting it on the top part here. And as I come down, my shadow is going to narrow a little bit. It's not going to be quite as wide down here as it is up in this area. I'm just going to take a little bit of white and mix it into that. Maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to work on my highlight side. Actually, I'm kind of messing around in here to see what I like the best. But I feel like this shadow would come deeper into here. Because this part is at the back, if you think of it like a ball, it would be this part right here in the center, and that's the farthest away from the light source, so it would be quite dark in there. A little bit of that lighter stuff going on down here. This would probably be the brightest part right here at the bottom. I'm going to bring that just a little bit lighter right here toward the edge. Stand back at it from a distance and judge it from there. Don't judge it while you're standing right in front of it. So I'm just going to kick that part back a bit, and then I'm going to go stand back and look at it. This part is way too bright right there. I now have a television monitor on the other side of my room, so I can tell what's going on while I'm recording. So what I'm doing is standing sideways, applying a little bit of paint, and then I'm looking at it in the monitor, because that really helps me get an idea of where I need to adjust my highlights and everything. And so if you don't have a monitor that you can look at it on, then maybe set up a mirror on the other side of the room. I think I like that. I just want to add a nice sharp highlight right here. And dust it in just like with everything else. Okay, same thing on the other eye. I'm going back to my round brush and we're going to do the same thing with the nose. So I'm mixing up my black brown. There's not really any white in there. And I'm going to start filling it in. Now the same rules apply here with the light source. However, and I guess we don't really have to do this since this is kind of a stylized skull. It doesn't have to be anatomically correct. But there's typically a little protrusion right up in here. And I might do a little bit of it, but I'm not gonna try and make it all realistic because this is not a very realistic skull. So I'm gonna do my own version of it because I do what I want. And you should do what you want. Because that's what art is you expressing yourself, doing things the way you want to do them. Art is not about learning how to copy something perfectly. That's not necessarily art. That's copying something. And I want you to take away from this video what you take away from it and apply it however you want to. Now, can you see what I did there? I left a spot right here for my light source. And on this side, I took it straight up so there's a hard line right at the point here. So that's where I'm going to put a little bit of a highlight, and then the rest of it I'm just going to put in shadow. Start mixing my white in there and start working on my highlight sides. I'm going to bring that line up pretty sharp right there too. So I have a stark contrast between the light and the dark side. This brush is a little bit harder to tap the color in than my angle brush. I might go back to my angle brush for this part. We'll see. Well, if I scrub it a little bit like that, it's a little bit better. Nope, I'm going back to the angle brush. It's all about what you're comfortable with. All right, let's do the part I've been avoiding because I really don't know what I want to do with them, and that is the teeth. All right, our last part here, and we're finally done. We're gonna paint in the background. Now, keeping my light source in mind again, the light is coming from here and shining this way. And so this part is bright, this part is dark. To make him really pop off of the canvas, I'm gonna do my background the opposite. So I'm gonna do the background darker here and getting lighter as we come to here. Now, I'm not going to talk through a lot of this. This is very similar to the way I did the background in the abstract face, but basically I'm going to use my 1-inch flat brush that I've wet in the jar. I'm going to use burnt umber, Mars black, and titanium white. So I'll start you off. I'm going to load up with some burnt umber on both sides of my brush. I'm going to get some Mars Black because I want it to be pretty dark with a little bit of white. And I'm just going to start filling in this background. As I go, I'm going to pick up less and less of these and more white. And I'm going to sign in. And there's our weird sugar skull thing. So this really was an exercise in overcoming frustration. Like I mentioned before, the painting I was working on all week really wasn't my style. So with frustration, I came back to the easel, regrouped, decided what it was about the painting that I didn't like, and came at it from the completely opposite approach. Now, this painting is far from perfect. This is something that I am very proud of because it's not something that I had a reference photo for. It's not something I had practiced. It's not something I had planned. It just happened. And that's what I really want you guys to get out of this video. When you're frustrated, if you just stop, I feel like you inhibit your growth. So decide what it is that is frustrating you about whatever it is that you're working on and approach it from the completely opposite perspective. If you decide to try this or something similar using some of the techniques and principles that I talked about in this video, I would love to see what you come up with. There's a link in the video description below to our Art Monster Squad Facebook group, and we would love if you would join and share what you've painted with us. If you happen to actually like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with a friend who you think would like it too. So thank you for watching this weird, I really have no idea what I'm painting video, and I'll see you next time.